Hello and welcome to The Stack. On this week's show, we talk magazines with Steve Watson from Stack Magazines. We also talk wine and print with Chris Kontos from Canny magazine and the world's only dedicated title to sign painting. Enjoy the show. From Midori House in London, this is The Stack, 30 minutes of print industry analysis, and I am Fernando Augusto Pacheco. We start the show with another Stack guy, Steve Watson, director of the amazing Stack Magazines, which launched back in 2008 as a magazine club. The subscription service is going stronger than ever, with a plethora of new titles. Once you subscribe, every month you will receive a different indie title, from topics ranging to sex to design. You name it. Steve dropped by at our office.
Stack started in 2008, so It's 17 years now.
Wow.
It's quite a long time.
You're still looking very fresh as ever. But, before we dive deep in some of the newer titles that you're working on, are you still excited? Do you still feel this energy from the publishing industry? How do you see the industry in 2025?
No, of course. I mean, look, it's a fact of independent publishing that it can be really hard to make a sustainable business out of these magazines. And so you can't kind of sugarcoat it. It's a difficult thing to do. But, I mean, virtually every day I'm seeing new magazines coming out. And I think that, at the moment, this is all playing out against the backdrop of the big tech platforms deciding they're not going to do things like fact-checking anymore. We know what that's going to mean. We know the direction that's going to go in. And I think that print magazines, for all that they're really not very good at doing lots of things, one thing that they are good at is building this close relationship with a reader and kind of building this trust. And so I'm sure we're just going to see more people turning to print for a kind of a bit of a break, really, a bit of a kind of antidote to everything that's happening in the world.
And you mentioned a break, but even when it comes to topics, I mean, I couldn't really say, oh my God, there's a lot of food magazines or fashion. It's basically across the board, I would say, when it comes to topics. Wouldn't you say so?
Totally, yeah. I don't know if this says something about me. I'm seeing a lot of sex at the moment.
Yes, actually,
there seems to be
that.
I'm thinking that at some point I'm going to put a post together for the Stack site looking at the various different types of erotic magazines, because it feels like, I think a lot of people have been talking about AFM, so the field magazine. So you've got something coming from the brand side. There's a load of stuff coming from the independents, and every single one of them, and I guess this is just something that happens with independent magazines, is you speak to the editor or the publisher or whatever, you say, why did you start this? And they say, well, there just wasn't anything out there that quite spoke to me. And obviously, something like sex and sexuality is so individual and personal. I feel like that's something that is really being explored at the moment. And I was reading a magazine yesterday that I was sent and genuinely found some of it really quite difficult. It was so raw and honest, but I also then just find that really interesting, that kind of incredibly intense expression of the way that someone sees the world. I find that really interesting.
I'm very glad you mentioned this, because I did notice kind of the return of sex in print. We have Erotic Review, which I think people can actually go and buy on Stack Magazines. And it's interesting because maybe, again, magazines are a safe space for that, because sometimes what those magazines talk are very intimate things, but they do it in quite a beautiful way, and you can read it privately as well, right?
Well, and also, I was talking to Lucy Rober, who's the editor of Erotic Review, and Joe just sort of said to her, does it make it harder for you because you are making an erotic magazine? She basically just laughed at me, and she was like, yes. there are and this isn't about like sort of kicking the big tech platforms, because fair enough, Instagram has to make sure that people aren't just sharing terrible imagery on there. But then the solution to that is to make sure that there are no nipples, there's nothing vaguely sexual. So we have these like massive gatekeepers now, these people who shape our culture for us. And guess what? Sex is just not part of that conversation. So again, I think that's a really clear reason why people turn to print, because once you've printed your thing, that exists in the world. Like if you can find a way of putting that in front of readers, you're then not having to kind of negotiate gatekeepers and kind of censorship. You just have to find your readers.
Well, just because we're talking about sex and the return of sex in print, let's talk about Stack magazines, because of course you send one mysterious magazine a month to your readers. And of course, you can buy other magazines on your website, which is amazing. So, for example, when you're dealing with a magazine, not necessarily controversial, but do you think about those things? Or do you think perhaps that your subscriber is someone that perhaps is open-minded?
Yeah, of course. Well, so the Stack subscriber definitely is open-minded. These are people who want to be surprised. They want to see something they wouldn't have come across themselves. And that's the kind of job that we do for them. But yeah, I definitely think about it. I mean, you just mentioned the erotic review, which I think it was November we sent that out last year. And I knew that I wanted to send it out because Lucy's done such a brilliant job with it.
Beautiful cover.
Oh, it's beautiful. The writing in there, the literature is just like such a high quality. And it ticks all of the boxes for everything I want to do with Stack. But 100%, like I knew that we would get some people off the back of that say, you've just sent me a sex magazine. And I'm not, that's not what I'm here for. But, I think we basically just have to kind of be a bit brave about that and say, well, okay, you're absolutely right. We did. I'm sorry, I hope that hasn't offended you. Do you know what? We're not going to send you another sex magazine because the whole point is that it's different every time. Exactly, yeah. So we can promise people now there'll be no sex on Stack for a few months at least.
Oh, what a shame. I'm joking. But it's interesting, for example, and what I like about Stack magazine is the sense of discovery. I follow the publishing industry closely. I have many editors coming here, but I still, look out for you. So I remember one of your magazines, the name, I forgot the name, but it was from Estonia. And I think there was a connection with the Estonian government. And I said, this is unique,
Yeah.
I haven't read this anywhere else.
Totally.
I love that.
That's A Shade Colder.
A Shade Colder.
And you're right, it's funded by the Estonian Ministry of Culture. And like that makes it sound like it's going to be this kind of slightly boring or at least safe picture of Estonian culture. And I've spoken to the editors about this and I still don't really understand it. But what they've decided to do is just go, no, make something bonkers. Make this like entirely crazy magazine, not just about Estonian creativity, but creativity from across the Baltics. And I got really interested in that when I saw the issue before this one, because that was the first one that they'd published since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. And obviously they're a neighbour of Russia. And it was really interesting reading these artists and creative people talking about what it means to have such a massive looming threat next door, and for your culture to, because like Estonian culture is so closely wrapped up with Soviet times, and I just, again, that's the sort of thing that like the little kind of bell in my brain starts ringing, and it's like, oh yeah, I want to put this in front of more people.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you did. And actually you brought some magazines.
Of course.
As usual, I love that. and there's one that actually, I only saw it online, but not yet in print, which is Broadcast. I mean, first of all, I love the visual, the font. And the word broadcast, I think, is a beautiful word. What can you tell us about this one?
So this is a magazine published by an organisation called Pioneer Works. They're based in Red Hook in Brooklyn. And Pioneer Works is an artist and scientist-led organisation. And I mean, so they've got like a big space. They host events and exhibitions. They publish books. They've got a really ambitious digital publishing sort of like branch, which is also called Broadcast. And this was the print magazine that came out of all of that. So the thing that I think is most valuable about it is the way that it takes science and art and kind of doesn't consider them to be different things. It kind of looks at the world through this prism of science and art, and it kind of encourages this really expansive, open view. And there's like crazy stuff in there, like somebody has reimagined the shape of the periodic table, or there's a piece you're looking at there on like the history of Adderall, and so these are quite sort of like nuggety technical things, but the whole thing is related in such a simple, easy way. It just welcomes you right in. You talk about the design. It has this lovely two-tone colour, so they have black and then this like sort of blue and green, and it just looks classy. Like it just
classic. That's the word. That's the word.
There's something there that when you see that, you want to know more.
Absolutely. And it's funny, I mean, perhaps changing slightly the topic, if you've seen the Rolling Stone US redesign, this kind of, when I would say classic, I mean, but it's good looking design, right? So I think it's kind of back for sure. Maybe not so minimalist as I would say, right?
Yeah, well, and I guess also the similarity that broadcast has with Rolling Stone is that that's a magazine. It's meant to be read. It has imagery in there, but first and foremost, I think it's about expressing the ideas in text. And I know that that's something that Richard Turley spent a lot of time thinking about when he did the redesign for Rolling Stone.
And we have another one here, which I don't know much about, which is a good thing because you will tell me right now. La Nueva Carne.
Yeah, so this is a magazine. La Nueva Carne means the new flesh, and it's all about the kind of the meeting place of technology and people. This issue is themed memory, so there's lots of stuff in here about us kind of almost like kind of surrendering our memories to the internet. Like, kind of you don't need to remember anything these days because it's all there in the cloud, except, of course, we know these websites are disappearing. So what does that mean for like our collective memory? There's really interesting stuff there on nostalgia and how kind of, sort of like history gets kind of flattened out. And I really love the cover. So I think the cover is Marcel Proust, because obviously he like famously talked about like, biting into the Madeleine and being taken back to his childhood. But they've done it on like a blank white page with Proust's face debossed out of the paper, which is like, probably about the least commercial approach you could have. But I think it's really nice.
Thank you, Steve. You can subscribe to Stack Magazines on stackmagazines.com, and you can also buy individual copies from a selection of titles too. And now we head to Athens to speak with photographer and editor of Canny magazine, Chris Kontos. His latest project is a natural wine bar in the shadow of the Acropolis called Canny Vins Bons Vivants. Kontos tells us more about the wine and the print.
To be completely honest, I never imagined myself to be an entrepreneur of any sorts or be a bar owner. But the idea kind of formed in my head because from the apartment that I'm speaking to you from right now, which is my previous apartment, I don't live here anymore. I moved more than a year ago to a different one. So we were living almost 10 years here with my wife and then with my son. And downstairs, there was this space for rent. For years, it was vacant and the price was reasonable. I was always thinking this space could be something I could like make use of, like to make a brick and mortar place for Kennedy, like an office or I don't know, like a place that would sell some, like the magazines or some other books. I realized that through the years, this infatuation I have with natural wines and through visiting different bars around the world and restaurants with this style of wines, and then many visits to Tokyo and many of those bars with natural wine again, not necessarily combining the listening part with the wines. To be honest, Tokyo has kind of separated those two. Like the Jazz Kissa started more as a coffee place where you could have a coffee and listen to high-end audio. And also there is the kisa with drinks, like with a whiskey or like a cocktail where you can again listen to high-end audio, some pretty impressive sound systems. But the natural wine scene had been thriving in Tokyo for many years as well. I got into this craze of natural wines after trying natural wines maybe for the first time in Paris around 2010, maybe I would say, somewhere around there. And then different cities. And so this is how everything kind of came about, like my love for wine, the fact that I knew many restaurateurs, many winemakers, all these listening bars in Tokyo, also the natural wine bars in Tokyo, which were amazing actually, and really inspired me. A certain place in London that was a huge inspiration called 40 Malby Street. It's in Bermondsey. I think it's an institution for this style of wine worldwide. And then a friend opened a restaurant in Geneva called Bombard, which was also for me a huge inspiration. And then slowly I started thinking that this space downstairs for my apartment would be a good place to do something like that.
And also, I think Kennedy has been going since 2013. So I think it will attract probably people that have been reading the magazine. Maybe they are locals in Athens or they are visiting because, they would trust the brand in a way as well, right?
Yeah, I thought it would be a meeting place for all the people who know the magazine from all around the world and people in Athens who know and love the magazine. I would have to say, if you allow me to say that, like in the same way I started Kennedy in 2012, which was a really risky move. Opening this bar was also a really risky move, I would say. But I believe in taking risks. I think in most occasions, taking risks is quite rewarding. So I kind of felt the same with the bar.
Well, and if you don't mind, let's talk a little bit about Kennedy magazine. I loved the Paris issue, which I believe that's the latest one, right? How are you planning? Is there a new issue coming out soon? What can you tell us about it?
So the Paris issue is quite old right now. It was released in June. So it's the latest issue, but it's already growing old. I mean, a lot of shops have been restocking it lately because it was sold out pretty fast. I think it's one of my favorite issues, if not to say my favorite. I try every new issue to be my favorite, to be honest. Otherwise, I would stop. But the Paris issue was really special to me because it marked a turning point for me, which I decided that the magazine had to be more around me and me doing most of the work in the magazine, writing most of the articles, doing most of the photos. For many years, I experimented with many contributors. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. There's many older issues that haven't aged so well for me. Maybe for other people they do, but maybe not for me. I decided I have to go back to making it personal. Before the Paris issue, it was the family issue, which was by far the most personal issue I've done because it was tangling with a really serious issue, which was my breakup with my wife. Luckily enough, we're back together again. But back then, it was really tough to share this. And it was a big part of that issue. And all the contributors on that issue was like people I know who had babies at the time and shared all their family pictures. And this led me into making the Paris issue, again, a really personal issue, which talked about my life in Paris. I used to live in Paris for a while. I've been going there for many years. I did most of the interviews myself. I did most of the photography myself. And people like this issue a lot. I would say it's a really iconic issue. Now, how will I move on from here? That's something you asked as well. I've been having a lot of thoughts lately of how I will continue to do Kennedy, and I think, I don't know if this is any big news, but I want to stop doing Kennedy as a periodical in a way. I want to be more free to use Kennedy as a way to do editions anytime and any way I want to, not like necessarily like the next issue will be this or the next issue will be that. Maybe the next Kennedy project will be just a book about something, but not necessarily like the next issue will be London. Maybe I'll do an issue about London, but
I would love to read that.
yeah, slowly I wanna get away from this way I'm publishing Kennedy right now and be more free to focus on things not necessarily in the way I'm doing now, that will give me more freedom to publish stuff which are feel more like editions. I don't know if that makes any sense.
And maybe dedicate a little bit more to photography, for example, because I know you are a photographer as well.
Yeah, for example, I'm a photographer, and a lot of people don't know that, which is so funny after so many years. Like people know I make Kennedy, but sometimes they don't know I'm a photographer. It's kind of absurd sometimes. I get many requests from photographers all the time to show me their work and like put their work in Kennedy, or agencies sending me requests to have their photographers on the magazine. I do this job as well, which is quite funny. So yeah, I want to focus more on doing more personal, even more personal stuff. Like for example, recently I was really inspired by a magazine that a friend of mine makes in Switzerland, in the city of Basel. He took things really far. He names his magazine after his name. So his name is Dino. The name of the magazine is Dino. It's mostly about him. And I really like this concept of having something that personal. I mean, I've done personal stuff myself. As I said before, I talked about my breakup with my wife. On the seventh issue of Kennedy, I had a full like 25-page spread of my wedding pictures. I mean, I've already gone down that road, but I want to do it maybe even more in a way, because I think live in a time where information is so much and too much sometimes, and reading personal stories is appealing.
Thank you, Chris. When in Athens, do pay a visit to Canny Vins Bons Vivants. And for more information about the magazine, go to canny-magazine.com. And now let's talk about Blag, or Better Letters Magazine. It's the world's only print and online publication dedicated to sign painting, featuring a mix of international designers and showcasing a range of cultural, typographic styles and histories. The publication has become an important resource for contemporary sign painters across the globe. With its sixth issue out now, Monocle's Maylie Evans spoke to Sam Roberts, editor and publisher, to find out more.
I love publishing online just as much as in print, but there is something very special about the print, and you sort of feel like in 50 to 100 years, is the online stuff still going to be there? Well, we don't know, but what we do know is that on some sign painter's shelf somewhere in the world will be a set of back issues of Blag. I got into all this through research and writing, first through ghost signs and then looking at the craft of sign painting. Around the time of the pandemic, I sort of rediscovered those origins and went back and did a book, in fact, about ghost signs, which is tangential but connected. And it was a bit of a rediscovery of that desire to investigate, communicate and write. And at the same time, one of the big print publications for the sign trade had gone digital only. And I thought that was something of a shame, because this craft is so tactile and physical and hand done in its execution. And to have something physical representing that felt to me important.
Okay, so you are 6 issues in and have a wide range of contributors from across the globe. As editor, how are you steering the ship?
What I'm really seeking out are stories that convey the international nature of this craft and the people and the projects and the traditions and histories in different parts of the world. I sometimes find things through social media, other press, and then increasingly people getting in touch with me. You know, people are aware of the magazine and they reach out and say, hey, have you heard about this tradition from the Philippines? Have you seen what these people are up to in Peru, and so on? These stories now begin to find their way to me. I take a very, very holistic view of the craft of sign painting and try to be as representative as I can of different traditions outside of what would be traditionally represented in the trade media, which are very US, Europe, kind of Australia, New Zealand centric. It's trying to broaden people's horizons from within and out of the trade.
And I'm just flicking through the magazine now, and there's a reoccurring segment, I suppose. I wondered if you could introduce it. It's called Fiateado. Apologies for my pronunciation. But tell me, how did it come to be a reoccurring segment?
Fileteado porteño, as I'll try to say in my best Spanish, or in this case, Argentinian Spanish accent. This is an art form that developed in the port of Buenos Aires, and it came from decorating fruit carts and other transportation. The exact origins and history are lost somewhat, but likely driven by inward migration from places like Italy. And it has evolved, though, over the years to become this highly decorative art form with motifs as acanthus leaves, dragons, pearls, bolitas, which are like these small balls. And these can be used either in purely figurative sense. You can have work that doesn't have any lettering on it, or combined with lettering in order to create signs and decorative panels. And it's moved now well beyond that original usage on vehicles to now be found on shop fronts, windows. Even big brands now have embraced it for packaging. Tattoos, people have got these decorations as tattoos. The first time I ever came across it was when I met Gustavo Ferrari, who came to a big sign painting convention in Rochester, Kent in 2014, and stayed in touch ever since. I invited him to do a regular column, which is called The Secrets of Fileteado Porteño. And issue by issue, he's built up. So he started with the small balls. Then he moved on to the acanthus leaves. Then he did borders and corners. And now he's beginning to show how to paint some of the animals that are conveyed in the art form. The last issue was horses. This one is dragons. It's very much a how-to. So it shows how to build that up from a rough pencil to a marker lines, and then to apply the paint and the highlights and the shadows and so on. I talk about the magazine being adventures in sign painting, craft, community and culture, and part of that is sharing knowledge and instructional things. We had a poster insert in the current issue, which is by Veronica in Copenhagen, showing how to do this wonderful technique with gold leaf on glass, where she's called it her pillow gild. It's a way of sort of moving the gold after you've applied it in order to give a very soft, curved look and feel to the gilded finish. There is instructional stuff in there, but that's not the sole purpose of the magazine.
Blag offers a mix of historical makers and designers as well as contemporary creatives working today. Why was it key for you to showcase maybe emerging talent as well as, I guess, the heavy hitters who you might be familiar with?
I've always been passionate about celebrating the past, but then, advocating for the present and the future. And one of the consistent pieces of feedback that I get is that it's a process of discovery for them. They find out about people that they'd never heard of before through the magazine and forge connections as a result. That through that process, there is a sense of belonging to a bigger community that's connected to the magazine. And bear in mind that the majority of sign painters are sole traders. It can be quite a lonely pursuit in many ways. And so the magazine does help to forge some of those connections, often across continents, between people. Something that I think is really important is bringing people's attention to others that maybe haven't been recognised for the work that they're doing, but they're plying the trade. There's some people are better and worse at putting themselves out there. And I think sometimes they need a bit of coaxing to say, hey, you could be in the magazine too, and a bit of encouragement to get in there. I love when I get to send a copy of the magazine to people that feature and contribute to it, and to hear their really, happy and joyful reactions to seeing themselves in print.
And in your conversations with makers today, what are some of the biggest challenges that these sign painters face right now?
One of the biggest is access to structured and formal learning programs. This is a trade that, with the advent of, in particular, vinyl cutting technology through the 90s, really, that's when it really hollowed out the industry, and lots of people that had been wielding a brush, hung them up, either took early retirement or embraced that technology or moved on to other pursuits. And as a result of that, technical training programs closed down, apprenticeships became less viable for sign shops to offer, and there was a void left in terms of where do you learn this? The traditional ways of learning would be a 3, 4, maybe even 5-year apprenticeship, or a sustained period of study at a technical college. And now there's only one school in Los Angeles. There's one now in Ireland that's doing a part-time program. But there's very, very few places that you can go and go deep into it. And so that's one of the real challenges for people that are starting out. There's a good provision, for example, of shorter workshops. There's now quite a lot of online courses, and that does seem to be filling part of the gap, but nothing quite beats that face-to-face contact and a sustained period of learning with input and feedback from somebody who is a master of the craft. So I think that's probably one of the big challenges. And then I would say, another one is marketing, and how do you get yourself out there and in front of people, particularly in the digital age when so much is algorithmically driven, and marketing yourself on platforms like Instagram, that is in and of itself almost like a full-time job. Some of the work that has to go into that kind of effort. Learning and marketing are probably a couple of the big challenges faced by the trade at the moment.
I understand there is an events element to Blag and your work outside of the magazine. Could you detail what some of that consists of?
I have organised a lot of in-person events, and that was a big part of my work before the pandemic, and I sort of stepped away from that. Each issue I have what I call a Blag Meet, and that is an online event, so it is digital, but it does allow interactions through Zoom and the chat function on there. It gives people that are inside the magazine a different platform to either be interviewed, carry out a demonstration, share a presentation, just even a look around their studio. That's one of the things that people love is, everyone's a bit nosy. They want to see, what does so-and-so's workshop look like? In terms of the ones that I organise, those are really the main focus at the moment. But the other big type of event within this community, and that I support and get involved with without necessarily organising directly, are letterheads events. And letterheads, in summary, is, I call it an anarchic organisation. Anybody in the world can put their hand up and say, hey, I'm having a get together, and people will meet. It's done on a not-for-profit, voluntary basis. It can be small. It could be a few people going over to somebody else's studio for some beers one evening, through to, for example, what's coming up in Cincinnati this summer, the 50th anniversary event, which will be 300 or 400 people at the American Sign Museum in America. And the letterheads movement came out of 7 apprentices in Denver, Colorado in the mid-70s who would get together and just share what they knew, what they had learned on the job, bring questions, challenges they were facing, share books. The photocopy would be running overtime each time they got together, photocopying books. It was this ethos of being open and not guarding the secrets and the knowledge of this craft. And that has continued without any formal organisation, without any president or chairperson or membership subscriptions. And I was introduced to it by a guy called Mike Meyer, who's a sign painter. In 2014, I went to my first event at his place, and it just chimed with me. That it was such a good ethos and way of approaching passing on of knowledge and skills. And so ever since then, so now coming on 11 years, I've been attending these events. I have organised a couple as well.
And that's it for this week's show. My thanks as ever to our editor, Jack Jewers. Any comments or queries, feel free to write to me, Fernando, at fp@monocle.com. And remember, we're back next Saturday at 10 a.m. London time. Meanwhile, you can always listen again at monocle.com and download the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You've been listening to The Stack. I'm Fernando Augusto Pacheco. It's goodbye from me.